She had been small from the start. The moment she entered the world, the others in the herd looked at her and shook their heads. Her legs were thin like twigs, her chest narrow, her frame delicate compared to her stronger kin. Where her siblings and cousins bolted across the meadow with thunder in their hooves, she stumbled and trailed behind, fighting just to keep up. The older mares clicked their tongues and turned their faces away. To them, she was a burden, a mouth that would eat, but never pull weight, a shadow of what a horse ought to be. It wasn't cruelty that made them cast her aside. It was survival. Life in the dry desert valleys and jagged canyons left no room for weakness. A horse too small to carry, too fragile to endure, would drain resources better spent on the strong. So she was pushed to the edge of the herd, overlooked, ignored. When the others drank at the stream, she was last. When the best patches of grass were claimed, she got only the trampled leftovers. Her body ached constantly from hunger and weariness, but the sting of rejection cut deeper than the sharpest thorn. She wanted so desperately to be like the others, to race, to leap, to matter. She would lower her head and try, straining every muscle until her breath came ragged and her knees buckled. And still, when she faltered, the whispers came. Too small, too weak, too slow. Sometimes the colts circled her, snorting and nipping playfully, though their games were edged with cruelty. They called her names with their gestures, pretending to collapse dramatically in her path, or darting past so fast she spun and stumbled in the dust. Their mocking neighs echoed in her ears long after they had galloped away. But the worst moments were not the laughter or the hunger. They were the moments of silence, when the herd simply forgot she was there. When they shifted as one body toward greener ground, she would sometimes be left behind entirely, scrambling to follow their fading silhouettes against the horizon. Each time it happened, panic clawed her heart. The desert was not kind to stragglers. Coyotes prowled at night, and the heat by day could kill faster than teeth. To be forgotten was almost as dangerous as being despised. And yet, she endured. Somewhere deep within her frail frame, there burned a small flame of defiance. She could not say where it came from. Perhaps from the mother who had licked her clean at birth before turning away, perhaps from the blood of ancestors who had carried warriors across endless plains. Whatever its source, the flame refused to be extinguished. At night, when the herd dozed under the pale wash of moonlight, she would gaze at the stars and dream. She imagined herself strong, her hooves pounding like drums, her mane whipping the wind. She saw herself racing ahead of the herd, not trailing behind. In her dreams, no one mocked her size. In her dreams, she was needed. Still, dreams did not fill her belly, nor silence the ache of loneliness. Each day was a battle to claim her place among those who did not want her. She grew skilled at slipping into shadows, at darting quickly for scraps, at surviving on little. Though the herd thought her weakness would destroy her, she was learning a different kind of strength. The strength to endure neglect, to keep going when no one believed in her. But she did not yet know it. All she felt was the sting of being unwanted. The little one walked with her head low, her ribs showing, her spirit bruised by the weight of rejection. And though she still clung to the herd, she carried a loneliness that pressed heavier on her than the fiercest sun. She had no way of knowing that far beyond the horizon, a man with strong hands and a compassionate heart was waiting. Someone who would not see her as too small, but as just enough. Someone who would change the course of her story forever. The land she lived in was not forgiving. It was as though the earth itself tested every living thing that tried to survive upon it. The desert sprawled wide, stretching from horizon to horizon, with its shifting sands and thorny brush. Jagged mountains rose like ancient guardians, their slopes scarred by time, their peaks crowned in red fire when the sun set. The rivers ran shallow most seasons, their beds cracked and dry except for rare storms that came roaring down the canyons with a fury that swept away everything in their path. It was a land of extremes. Days scorched, nights froze. Water was scarce, food scarcer still. And those who survived here learned quickly that strength was the only shield against the cruelty of the wilderness. The herd moved constantly, never staying too long in one place. They knew the secret paths to the last trickles of water, the grazing patches hidden between rocks, the shadowed gullies where a little green still clung stubbornly to life. The larger, stronger horses endured these migrations, their bodies built to withstand the long treks. But for the little one, every journey was a trial. Her legs trembled on the endless marches. Her lungs burned when the hot winds blew sand into her face. She lagged behind often, her chest heaving as she struggled to climb the rocky trails. Each stumble earned her more disapproving looks, more reminders that she was a weak link in a chain that had no room for frailty. Predators prowled the edges of their world. Coyotes slunk in the shadows, their yellow eyes glinting at dusk. Cougars watched silently from cliffs. The little one's size made her an easy target, and she knew it. She could feel their stares sometimes, the prickling weight of hungry patience. Her only safety was the herd, yet the herd kept her at the margins. She walked always on the outside, nearest the danger. The land, too, seemed to single her out. Thorns tore at her hide when she darted for cover. Loose rocks slipped beneath her, hooves more often than others. Even the wind seemed crueler to her, snapping her thin mane into her eyes until she could barely see. But she never cried out. She had learned long ago that her cries would not be answered. Still, for all its harshness, the land was alive. At Apache dawn, the desert glowed gold, each grain of sand catching fire beneath the sun's first rays. The mountains echoed with eagle calls, sharp and piercing. At night, the stars spilled across the sky so thickly that the little one often forgot her weariness just to gaze upward, wondering if the heavens held a place for her too. The others in the herd saw only survival in this land. She, however, saw its secret beauty. She noticed the wildflowers that dared to bloom between stones, their petals fragile yet stubborn. She saw the rabbits that darted quick as shadows across the dunes, always escaping just in time. She even marveled at the resilience of the cactus, standing tall and full of water where nothing else could grow. Perhaps it was because she herself was small and fragile, that she could recognize strength in the unlikely places. She admired the land even as it punished her, because she understood what it meant to endure against odds. Yet admiration did not fill her belly or soothe her tired limbs. Each day was a gamble. Would she keep pace, or would the desert finally claim her? The others did not say it aloud, but some silently expected that one day she would not rise after a long night. But the little one rose each morning, no matter how much her body ached. She rose because the desert, unforgiving as it was, whispered a challenge to her. Survive me if you can. And she would. Still, she could not know that the same harsh land that tried so hard to break her was guiding her, shaping her, and slowly leading her path toward the one heart strong enough to see her worth. Somewhere in the vastness of mountains and dust, a man was walking too. A man who would not overlook her because he himself had been tempered by the same brutal earth. And soon the land would bring them together. If the harsh land weighed heavy on her body, the whispers of the herd pressed even heavier on her spirit. The little one could endure hunger, thirst, and long marches, but it was harder to endure the sound of her own kind laughing at her expense. The whispers began softly, almost harmless, as though spoken in passing. A mare, glancing at her thin legs, would shake her head and murmur, "Too frail to carry." A stallion, watching her stumble on a rocky slope, would sigh, "She'll never last another season." They never said such things to her directly, but she heard them all the same. Their words traveled on the wind, curling into her ears like thorns. Soon, the young colts grew bolder. They had strength to spare and mischief to burn, and she became their target. They darted around her, kicking up dust until she coughed and blinked through stinging eyes. They pretended to collapse in her path, rolling dramatically in the dirt before springing up again, neighing with laughter. Sometimes they would run circles around her until she grew dizzy and tripped, tumbling into the dust. Too small, they whinnied. Too slow. Each jeer was a stone dropped into her chest. She wanted to fight back, to shout with her hooves, to prove them wrong. But every time she tried to keep up with them, her legs betrayed her. Her lungs gave out. Her small body simply could not match theirs. and so their laughter only grew. The mares were no kinder. They did not mock with laughter, but with silence. When they gathered close, grooming each other's coats or standing flank to flank for warmth, they left no space for her. When danger passed nearby, they formed their protective circle and left her on the outside. She would press closer, trying to squeeze in, but the flick of a tail or a cold glare would push her back. To them, she was not worth protecting. Loneliness clung to her like a second skin. She found herself moving at the edges of the herd, not just because she was forced there, but because she was ashamed. Every stumble, every sign of weakness seemed to prove their whispers true. Maybe she really was too small. Maybe she really would never last. At night, she sometimes lay awake, her ears twitching at the faint sounds of others sleeping peacefully nearby. Their breathing was steady, their bodies warm, their place in the world secure. She, meanwhile, curled her legs tightly beneath her thin frame, trying to make herself smaller, trying not to let the sadness seep out in soft, pitiful sounds. But, even in her despair, a spark of defiance flickered within her. When the colts jeered, she kept moving. When the mares shut her out, she survived the night alone. Every cruel whisper carved her heart raw, but it also carved her into something tougher, sharper, more resilient than she knew. Still, she longed for just one voice, just one, to speak kindness. She dreamed of hearing someone say she was enough. She dreamed of a place where she belonged, not on the outside looking in, but at the very heart of something greater than herself. The whispers of mockery told her she had no future, but deep inside she clung stubbornly to the hope that the whispers were wrong. What she did not yet know was that her hope was not misplaced. Beyond the ridges and canyons, a pair of eyes had already seen her struggle. A man, an Apache warrior, would soon cross her path, and when he did, the whispers that haunted her would begin to fade, replaced by something she had never known before: respect. He came from the mountains. The people called him strong. Though his strength was not only in muscle, he carried himself with the quiet assurance of one who had endured much and survived more. His shoulders were broad, his hands calloused from work and battle, but it was his eyes that spoke most clearly of who he was. Dark, steady, and unyielding, they were the eyes of a man who had seen hardship and loss and had chosen not to let either break him. Among his people, he was known for his endurance. He could run for miles across blistering desert without faltering, climb steep ridges with ease, and carry burdens that would have bent another man's back. Yet it was not only his body that was strong. His spirit was disciplined, rooted in the old teachings passed down through generations. He had been taught that strength was not meant for pride but for protection, not to dominate but to uphold. And so, though others saw him as a warrior, he thought of himself as something quieter, a keeper of traditions, of family, of the land itself. He had fought when he needed to, but more often he built. He built with his hands, carving wood into tools, weaving reeds into baskets, raising shelters that stood firm against the desert winds. He built with his heart, too, helping the weak, guiding the lost, and standing steady when others wavered. But even the strong can know loneliness. His people respected him, yes, but respect is not the same as belonging. Too often he felt apart, as though his quiet ways made him different from the rest. He gave his strength freely, but rarely did anyone look past it to see the man beneath. It was on a journey across the desert, searching for wild horses to bring back to the camp, that he first saw her. She was smaller than the others, trailing behind the herd like a shadow. Dust clung to her thin coat and her ribs showed with each breath. At first glance she looked weak, unremarkable, just as the others had judged her. But he did not look at her as others did. His gaze lingered, steady, thoughtful. He saw the way her ears flicked, alert, even when her body sagged with exhaustion. He noticed how she kept moving, no matter how often she stumbled. She was mocked, pushed aside, yet still she rose each morning, to face another day. To most, she was a failure. To him, she was something else entirely. He knew what it meant to be overlooked, to have others see only the surface and dismiss what lay beneath. He recognized her struggle because in some way, it was his own. When the herd shifted and moved away, he remained still, watching her. She limped, but she did not stop. Her eyes held a quiet fire, small but unbroken. And in that moment, he felt a stirring deep within his chest. Here, before him, was not weakness. Here was endurance, courage, and will hidden in fragile bones. He spoke no words aloud. There was no need. Instead, he followed quietly, keeping his distance but not letting her drift from his sight. She did not know it yet, but her life was about to change. The strong Apache had chosen her, not out of pity, not because she needed saving, but because he saw something that others had refused to see. Potential. Where others had cast her aside, he would give her a place. Where others saw a burden, he saw a companion, and in time he would prove to her that her smallness was not her curse. It was her gift. The first time he approached her, she flinched. It was evening when the sky burned with the red glow of a desert sunset and the herd settled near a shallow stream. The stronger horses crowded around the water, their reflections rippling as they lowered their heads to drink. She, as always, hung back. She stepped forward, hesitated, then stepped back again. Every time she tried to move closer, another shoulder blocked her path. Eventually, she gave up and lingered at the edges, thirst gnawing at her throat. From his place on the ridge, the Apache warrior watched. He had seen this pattern before. The way the herd claimed the best, leaving her to scraps, forcing her to drink last when the water was already muddied with silt. That night he chose not to remain only a watcher. He descended slowly, his steps steady and calm, making no sudden movement that might startle her. The other horses noticed him and shifted uneasily, but he did not pay them mind. His eyes were on her alone. She froze when he drew near. Her ears flicked back, her thin legs tense and ready to flee. No human had ever approached her this closely before. She had heard their voices from afar, seen them ride the stronger horses, but never had one walked directly to her with such intent. Her heart thudded in her chest, and for a moment, she thought she might bolt. But he did not rush her. He crouched low, lowering himself to the level of her wary eyes. Slowly, he extended his hand. In his palm lay a handful of cool water, scooped from the stream. The droplets slid between his fingers, shimmering in the fading light. She sniffed, the air cautiously. The scent of water called to her, stronger than her fear. Still she hesitated, glancing at the herd as though expecting them to laugh at her for daring to accept what was offered. But the herd paid her no attention. For once, their indifference was her freedom. Step by step she edged closer. Her muzzle brushed his palm and she drank. The water was warm from his skin but sweeter than anything she had tasted in days. She drank deeply, her small body trembling with relief. The warrior did not move, did not speak. He simply held steady, letting her choose the pace. When she had finished, she lifted her head and looked at him. For the first time, someone's gaze met hers without judgment. His eyes held no mockery, no dismissal, only calm recognition. A strange warmth spread through her chest. She did not know what to call it, but it felt like being seen. The next evening, he returned. Again, he offered water. The evening after that, a scrap of dried grass he had gathered with his own hands. Each time he came with patience. He never forced closeness, never grasped, never cornered. He simply offered and waited. And slowly, her fear began to fade. She began to step toward him willingly. She learned the sound of his voice, low and steady, carrying no sharpness. She learned the rhythm of his breathing, the strength of his stillness. Where others had only pushed her away, he drew her nearer with quiet gestures that spoke louder than any command. It was not a bond forged in a single moment, but in many small ones. A gesture here, a kindness there, a hand that carried no whip, a presence that did not demand but invited. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like a burden. She felt chosen, and in that gentle beginning, the seed of something greater was planted. Trust. Trust did not arrive like a storm. It came slowly, like the desert dawn. At first she kept her distance, even after accepting his water and his food. She would linger near him, but never too close, always ready to bolt if his hand moved too quickly or his voice rose too loud. Fear, after all, had been her companion longer than kindness. But the Apache warrior understood this. He did not rush her. He knew that trust built too fast could collapse just as easily. So he waited. Each day he came with something small, a handful of grain, a splash of water, a few tender words spoken in his tongue. He never failed her. His presence became as steady as the rising sun, as predictable as the path of the stars. The herd may have cast her aside, but here was someone who returned again and again without judgment. Little by little, she began to close the gap. She no longer flinched when he walked near. She no longer skittered away at the sound of his boots on the stones. Instead, she began to watch him with quiet curiosity. When he worked with leather or wood, she edged closer, her ears flicking forward, to catch the rhythm of his movements. When he sang to himself, low, steady songs that rose from his chest like wind over the canyon, she found herself calming. One evening, as the sky dimmed to violet, she did something she had never done before. She touched him first. Tentatively, she extended her muzzle and brushed it against his shoulder. It was the smallest of gestures, but for her it was immense. It was a question, a fragile offering of trust. The Apache did not laugh, nor did he seize the moment to bind her as others might have done. He simply stood still, breathing slow, his eyes soft. Then he reached up and laid his hand gently against her neck. The touch was firm but kind, like a weight meant not to trap, but to steady. She shivered, but she did not pull away. In that moment, something shifted within her. From then on, the bond grew. She followed him more readily, her steps falling in line with his. When he called softly, she came. When he lifted his hand, she waited. She began to learn the rhythm of his world, the way he built fires at night, the way he moved silently through the land, the way he spoke to the earth as though it were alive. And though she could not understand his words, she felt their meaning. He too was learning from her. He noticed her sharp awareness, the way her ears caught sounds long before his own. He noticed her endurance, how despite her small size and frail body, she never quit. She struggled, yes, but she did not stop. To him, this resilience was worth more than brute strength. The herd noticed the change as well. Though they still mocked her, their laughter grew uneasy. She was no longer entirely theirs to dismiss. There was a man now, strong, respected, who stood beside her. The colts no longer dared to circle her with the same boldness. The mares glanced at her with quiet puzzlement, as if trying to understand what he saw in her that they had missed. For the little one, it did not matter what they thought. For the first time in her life, she was not walking alone. She had someone who saw her not for what she lacked, but for what she carried inside. And with each passing day, her trust deepened into something more. It was not only trust in him, but in herself. His patience, his quiet faith was teaching her a truth she had never dared to believe, that she was capable, that she was worthy. The bond between them was no longer fragile. It was becoming strong, woven from small gestures and daily choices tempered by the harsh land around them. And soon that bond would be tested in ways neither of them yet imagined. It began with the smell of smoke. At first it was faint, a sharp tang on the wind that made the little one lift her head and flare her nostrils. The Apache warrior noticed it too. He paused in his work, mending a leather strap, and raised his face to the sky. The horizon was darkening, not with rain clouds, but with a heavy, choking haze that grew thicker by the minute. A fire was sweeping the canyon. In the desert, fire moved like a living beast, devouring dry grass and brittle shrubs, leaping from one thorn bush to the next. The wind fed it, carrying sparks farther than eyes could see. Within moments, the orange glow appeared on the ridge. The roar of flames rose, deep and hungry, like thunder trapped on the earth. The herd panicked first. Snorts filled the air, hooves, struck the ground in a frantic drumbeat. They bolted, kicking up dust as they scattered in all directions. The little one, caught in the chaos, stumbled as larger bodies rushed past. She barely managed to stay on her feet as they abandoned her without a glance. But the Apache did not abandon her. He moved quickly, his calm presence cutting through the fear. His sharp eyes scanned the land. Ahead, the fire closed off one path. Behind, the herd's frantic stampede left nothing but confusion. To the left, the canyon narrowed into a tight pass between rocks, dangerous for larger horses, but perhaps just narrow enough for one small and quick. He whistled sharply, the sound slicing through the noise. The little one's ears flicked, and despite her fear, she turned toward him. He was already moving, urging her forward with firm gestures. For a heartbeat, instinct told her to run with the herd, to follow the mass of bodies fleeing into the open desert. But something deeper tugged at her, trust. She chose him. They ran together toward the pass. The air grew hotter, heavy with ash that burned her lungs. Sparks hissed as they landed on the ground around her, tiny flames that threatened to become larger with each gust of wind. Her legs ached, her chest heaved, but she kept pace, driven by his steady presence ahead of her. The canyon walls loomed on either side, closing in tight. Rocks jutted, sharp and jagged, leaving barely enough space to squeeze through. A larger horse would have been trapped, but she, small, thin, overlooked, slipped between the stone like water through a crack. The Apache followed close behind, his hand brushing the rock as he steadied himself. Halfway through, a boulder blocked part of the path. She hesitated, heart pounding. The fire's roar grew louder behind her, the heat pressing close. She could not turn back, there was no time. She pawed the ground nervously, uncertain. Then the Apache's voice came, calm, low, commanding without force. His tone carried not anger, not fear, but certainty. It told her, "You can do this. Trust yourself." She leapt. Her hooves scraped against the stone, but she cleared the obstacle, landing unsteadily before pushing forward again. The Apache followed, swift and sure. Together, they broke free of the canyon just as the fire swept into it, filling it with a choking blaze that would have swallowed them both. They emerged into open land, coughing, trembling, but alive. The little one's sides heaved, her thin body drenched in sweat. She had never run so hard, never faced such terror. Yet she had survived because of him, yes, but also because of herself. She had chosen the narrow path when the herd fled. She had leapt when fear told her to stop. The Apache laid his hand against her neck, steady and strong. His eyes, dark and unwavering, met hers with quiet pride. In that moment, she understood. Her smallness, once a curse, had saved them both. The fire had tested her, and she had not failed. When dawn finally came, the world smelled of ash. The fire had passed in the night, leaving the land blackened and scarred. The air still smoldered and smoke rose in thin trails from the burned earth. The herd, scattered and frightened, began to return in small groups, drawn by the familiar ground despite the devastation. Their coats were streaked with soot, their eyes wide with exhaustion. They had expected to find the little one gone. Some whispered that she must have perished in the flames, she, who was always too small, too weak. But when they saw her emerge from the charred canyon, their whispers fell silent. She walked beside the Apache warrior, her head held higher than before. Her sides still heaved from the effort of the night before, and ash clung to her coat. But her eyes were different. They burned with a quiet fire, not unlike the flames that had threatened to consume her. She was no longer trailing, no longer stumbling. She had endured what many of the stronger ones had barely survived. The herd stared, disbelief rippling through them. It was not only that she had survived, it was how. The narrow canyon she had braved was a place they would never have dared enter. Too tight, too treacherous, too dangerous. Yet she had done it. Her small size, once their cruelest insult, had been her salvation. Where the powerful could not fit, she had passed through. Where the swift had faltered, she had endured. Word spread quickly among them. Even the boldest colts, once so eager to mock her, now watched her with something closer to awe. No one jeered. No one laughed. For the first time in her life, silence meant respect. The mares, too, looked upon her differently. They no longer pressed her out of their circle. Their eyes followed her when she moved, as though trying to measure the strength that had been hidden in her all along. Some even stepped aside to let her drink first, a gesture that left her startled, almost uncertain of how to accept it. But the little one did not need their approval. What mattered most was what she now understood about herself. She had always believed she was weak because the world told her so. Every stumble, every cruel whisper, every cold glance had pressed her deeper into doubt. Yet in the fire's trial, she had discovered something undeniable. Her body might be small, but her spirit was not. She had faced what others fled. She had chosen trust over fear, courage over despair, and she had survived, not by accident, but by strength. The Apache warrior saw it too. When he laid his hand against her side, there was pride in his touch. He had always believed in her potential, but now she had proven it to herself. The bond between them deepened, no longer fragile but forged in fire. That night, as they rested beneath the stars, he spoke softly to her, words in his tongue that she could not understand, but somehow felt. His tone was low, steady, reverent, as though he were thanking her. For what, she did not know. Perhaps for trusting him, perhaps for surviving with him, perhaps simply for being who she was. And though the herd still kept its distance, she no longer walked at its edges with her. Head bowed low, she walked with the warrior. She walked with quiet pride. The fire had stripped the land bare, but in its wake it had revealed her truth. That strength was not measured in size, but in courage, endurance, and heart. From that day forward, she was no longer the little one who trailed behind. She was something else, something the herd would learn to respect. And yet, her journey was not finished. For the Apache warrior had one more gift to give her, a gift that would change her life forever. The days after the fire carried a new stillness. The land was scarred, blackened, and quiet, yet out of that silence something unexpected began to grow, a bond not only of trust, but of belonging. The Apache warrior had always been a builder. His people knew him for the strength of his hands, the way he shaped wood, stone, and earth into tools and shelters that endured storms and seasons. But when he looked at the little one, thin and weary, yet unbroken, he knew she deserved more than scraps of survival. She deserved a place where she was safe, a place that was hers. So he began to build. At the edge of a sheltered canyon, where water trickled even in dry seasons and mesquite trees spread their shade, he chose the ground. There, he gathered stones and set them in a circle, steady and strong. He cut cedar poles from the high ridges and carried them on his back, one by one, though the labor was heavy. He wove branches and grasses into walls, careful and patient, until the structure stood firm against the wind. It was not grand, but it was more than she had ever known. It was a home. The little one watched as he worked, her dark eyes following each movement. At first, she did not understand. She had never been given more than what others begrudged her. To see a man labor so hard for her alone left her restless, uncertain. She paced the edges of the canyon, sometimes approaching to sniff at the stones he placed, sometimes retreating, as though afraid it might vanish if she came too close. But when the shelter was finished, the Apache led her to it. He did not push her inside. He simply stood nearby, his hand resting lightly on her neck, waiting. Slowly, hesitantly, she stepped forward. The ground beneath her hooves was soft with fresh grass he had cut and laid. The walls shielded her from the biting wind. Overhead, the roof of woven branches let sunlight in, but kept the harshest rays away. It was cool, quiet, safe. For the first time in her life, she felt what it meant to be protected, not merely tolerated, not merely allowed to survive, but cared for. She lowered her head, breathing in the scent of cedar and earth. A warmth spread through her chest, not unlike the warmth she had felt when he first offered her water. But this was deeper. This was permanence. This was belonging. The herd passed nearby in the days that followed. Some came to look, their eyes wide with curiosity. They saw the home he had built for her, the grass he cut for her, the way she stood, close to him without fear. No laughter came now, only silence, and perhaps in some a quiet envy. The little one no longer sought their approval. She no longer longed to press herself into their circle. She had her own circle now, one built with stone, wood, and the steady devotion of the warrior who had chosen her. At night, when the stars lit the canyon sky, she rested inside her shelter, while the Apache sat nearby by the fire. Sometimes he would hum the old songs his people had carried for generations, and the sound soothed her into sleep. Other times, he simply sat in silence, his gaze on the flames, as though he too had found something he had been missing, companionship that required no words. The gift he had given her was more than walls and a roof. It was dignity. It was a place in the world where she was no longer too small or too weak. Here, she was not cast aside. Here, she was wanted. And as the firelight danced across them both, horse and warrior, it was clear that in giving her a home, he had also found one himself. Seasons turned. The burned land healed, the canyon grasses grew back green, and the little one changed with the passing of time. No longer did her ribs show with every breath. No longer did her steps falter at the end of long days. Her body filled out, still small compared to the others, but stronger now, solid, resilient. Yet the greatest change was not in her body, but in her spirit. She had once walked with her head low, ears drooping, her gaze fixed on the dust beneath her hooves. Now she carried herself differently. Her ears flicked forward, her head lifted to the horizon. Where once she had clung to the edges of the herd, she now stood tall beside the Apache warrior, unafraid of her place. The herd had noticed. At first, they lingered at a distance, as though unsure how to treat her. Some still doubted, whispering that she was not truly strong, only sheltered. But doubt faded as days passed and proof mounted. She traveled the same long paths as the rest. She endured the same storms, the same hunger, the same harsh land. Only now she did not falter. The Apache had taught her not just with food and water, but with patience and faith. His quiet belief in her had awakened belief within herself. The Colts who had once circled her with jeers now watched her with wide eyes. When they bolted across the meadow, she ran too. Not to prove herself, not to silence their laughter, but simply because she could. Her strides were shorter, her speed less than theirs, but she ran with joy and certainty. The mares, once cold and dismissive, now shifted to make space for her at the stream. Some even lingered near her shelter, curious about the place built only for her. Respect had replaced scorn, but the greatest change came from within. The little one no longer thought of herself as too small. She understood now that size did not measure worth. Strength, she had learned, came in many forms. It was in the endurance to keep walking when others left her behind. It was in the courage to trust when fear told her to flee. It was in the quiet, fire that refused to be extinguished, even when the world said she was nothing. She had once been nameless in her herd, just another overlooked body. Now the Apache had given her a name in his tongue, a name that meant little flame. Because, he told her, though she was small, she burned bright enough to survive the harshest storm, the fiercest fire. And so she carried that name as her new identity. No longer cast aside, no longer invisible. She was Little Flame, companion of the strong Apache, survivor of fire, bearer of quiet strength. The man, too, had changed. In choosing her, in building her a home, he had found something he himself had long missed. He had always been strong for others, always given, always carried. But with her he did not need to prove anything. She asked nothing but presence, nothing but patience, and in return she gave him loyalty that words could not measure. Together, they were not master and beast, not savior and weakling. They were companions, two souls shaped by the same harsh land, both overlooked in their own ways, both finding in each other the home they had been denied. On a quiet evening, when the sun slipped behind the mountains and the desert sky turned to gold, the Apache rested by the fire while Little Flame stood beside him, her coat glowing in the fading light. She lifted her head to the wind, no longer timid, no longer hidden. She had become what she was always meant to be, not the small one cast aside, but the strong one who endured, cherished for exactly who she was. And in that moment, with the fire crackling and the stars beginning to wake, it was clear that her story was no longer one of rejection. It was a story of belonging.